Hey everybody, this is Dr. Chris Dost. Welcome back to my channel. Today, Milo and I are going to be taking you through the first few verses of Psalm 136 in Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. Okay, so let's get started in Psalm 136 and verse 1. We'll be looking in the top left quadrant where we have Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, ki leolam chasdo. Slowly. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, ki leolam chasdo. And if we look over to the right, and that's the reading that we have in 11Q5 from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So here we have Hodu. Now here we have the Assyrian square script for most of the verse, but the name of God, as you'll often find in the Dead Sea Scrolls, is written in what we often call Paleo-Hebrew script, Yud, He, Vav, He. Yud, He, Vav, He. That's referred to as the Tetragrammaton, or the four-letter name for God, which you see over here on the left in the Masoretic text. Now, even though that would have been pronounced Yahweh or something like that, we notice that it's not vocalized that way. You can tell that by the kamatz vowel here, the long A, which suggests that we are to read Adonai, the word for Lord. And this attests to a convention that originated somewhere around the 3rd century BC of reading the word Lord, and you heard me pronounce Adonai before, instead of the name of God, Yahweh. But aside from that one little graphic difference, we see that the text is identical. Of course, there are no vowels or Masoretic markings in the Dead Sea Scrolls because that doesn't come until the Middle Ages. But the consonantal text of the Hebrew is exactly the same here. And we'll translate it. Often we'll say give praise, hodu here. This is going to be a hifil plural imperative. We often translate it to praise. The word for praise in Hebrew typically means to confess. And we'll come back to that in just a minute. But give praise to God, acknowledge God, confess to God that, ki is that here, ki tov. This is to be understood as that he is good, that he is good. Now the pronoun who is left out here, but it's understood. So hodu, confess or give praise, l'Adonai, to the Lord, ki tov, because he is good. Or you could say, confess to the Lord that he is good. Either reading could work there. So in Hebrew, ki can mean that or because, and we have both possibilities here. So either give thanks to the Lord because he is good, or confess to the Lord that he is good. Ki leolam, now here ki clearly means because, ki leolam. Now, leolam is an interesting word in Hebrew. It's often translated into English as forever. And one of the things we need to be careful of is that in the Hebrew scriptures, the concept of forever or eternity is often not as present as English translations would suggest. And so we have to think of this, as one of my teachers said, more in terms of remote time for a long, long time. Ki leolam, the translations will say forever, is his chasdo. Chasdo means his, and this is often translated as mercy. But the word chesed in Hebrew is probably better thought of as covenant faithfulness, loyalty to his covenant, that sort of thing. You can see here that it means a joint obligation between relatives, and therefore suggests loyalty. Now you do, in addition, get the idea of goodness and graciousness. And so the Septuagint is not off here. In fact, the Hebrew Aramaic lexicon takes it this way. They cite Psalm 136 as an example. Now, this is all contextually determined. So the question in how we read the word chasdo in Hebrew all has to do with how we interpret the context. Is Psalm 136 talking about God's covenant faithfulness, or is it talking about his loyalty? Or is it talking about his goodness to his people? And while the two ideas are intertwined, they're not identical. And so I would be inclined to translate this as give thanks to God because he is good, because we'll go with the meaning of forever as long as you understand it with an asterisk. Forever is his covenant faithfulness. The O at the end here, of course, is the third masculine singular pronoun. So for his covenant faithfulness is, perpetual. That might be even a better way to take leolam here. I'm kind of thinking out loud on the spot. But his covenant faithfulness is perpetual. It's ongoing. All right, and we said that the Dead Sea Scrolls over here to the right from 11Q5, that's the 11th cave of Qumran, for those who are not familiar with this nomenclature. It reads exactly the same. So the Dead Sea Scrolls attest here in Psalm 136:1 to the exact reading that's there in the Masoretic text from the Middle Ages. This reading comes right out of the Leningrad Codex. I want to point out that this is actually numbered as Kuf, 100, Lamed, meaning 30, and He, meaning 5. So this is actually numbered as Psalm 135 here. Just wanted to point that out. We can talk about that some other time. But you'll see that the text is the same. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov. I hope everybody's enjoying this video. Before we continue, I just want to alert you that I'm now teaching for Sabra Global Education, www.sabraedu.com, www.sabraedu.com, and there you can check out my teacher page and find out all of the courses that I'm currently teaching on Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, and so on. If you're interested in taking a class in one of those languages or just want to do one-on-one lessons, you can reach out to me at chris@sabraedu.com, chris@sabraedu.com. All right, let's get back to the video. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, ki leolam chasdo. And so it's the text of the Leningrad Codex that is presented in Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, which is what you see on your screen here in the left quadrant. All right, now I want to take a look at the Targum of Psalms here. And so if we look at the bottom left quadrant, it begins over here where it says, Shabachu kadam Adonai, arum tav, arum le'alam tuvei. And I'll read that one more time for you. Shabachu kadam Adonai, arum tav, arum le'alam tuvei. Now, shabachu means give praise. It's a very good translation, a very faithful translation for hodu up here. Kodam Adonai. This means before God, before God. And some other time we'll get into the way that prepositions and other ideas about our relationship with God, where humans' relationship with God and interactions with God are represented in the Targumim. But for now, give praise before God because, and here's the word for good. So in Aramaic, we have the word tav, whereas in Hebrew, we had the word tov, tov. So give praise before the Lord because he is good, because, arum, la'alam, perpetually, if you want to translate it forever, tuvei. And the a here is a third masculine singular pronominal suffix, just like, right there, just like the o in chasdo. And so tuvei means his goodness. So Psalm 136 in the Targumim reads, give praise before the Lord because he is good, because his goodness is perpetual, or his goodness is forever. Whereas in the Hebrew we have because his covenant faithfulness is forever. So for the most part, it's a very wooden translation, but there are some subtle differences. Instead of l'Adonai, up here in the Hebrew, to the Lord, give praise directly to the Lord. It says give praise before the Lord, Kodam Adonai. And then instead of his covenant faithfulness, that's understood as his goodness. All right, so that is the Targum of Psalms. Now let's look over at the Greek here in the Septuagint. And it begins with the word Alleluia, which is a transliteration into Greek of the Hebrew word hallelujah, which you see at the beginning of some Psalms. Allelu is an imperative in the plural, meaning give praise. And Yah, the iota alpha at the end, is a shortened form of the name of God. So give praise to Yah, give praise to Yahweh. So the Greek begins with exomologeste, which means confess, confess. So confess, to kurio. This is in the dative. Confess to the Lord. Confess to the Lord, which we said before is a legitimate understanding of Hodu Ladonai. Hodu Ladonai. So confess to the Lord that hoti Christos, that he is good, morally good or benevolent. And so we see that the Septuagint is reading the Hebrew just like the Aramaic is here. Hoti, because eston iona, which is a literal translation of leolam. So far we have a very wooden translation here in the Septuagint. Hoti eston iona ta eleos autu, the mercy of him. Autu is in the genitive, of course. So because forever is the mercy of him, because his mercy is forever. And so here's where we get the idea of mercy. It comes from the Greek. All right, let's look at one more verse. Okay, so we have in Psalm 136:2, in the Masoretic text, Hodu lelohei ha-Elohim ki leolam chasdo. Hodu lelohei ha-Elohim ki leolam chasdo. So we have this repetition here, and this means give praise to the God of gods, which is a way of expressing the superlative in Hebrew. So in English, we have adjectives, for instance, like great, greater, greatest. The EST form of adjectives, that's the superlative. And so if you want to say that something is the greatest in biblical Hebrew or the highest or whatever, sometimes what will happen is you'll express a word in the singular in a genitive construct and follow it with the plural. So in this case, the God of gods. It's kind of like the expression King of Kings. What does King of Kings really mean? Well, it means something like the greatest of kings. Here is the God of gods is the most superior God. Now, does this text have a polytheistic or monolatrous sort of worldview behind it? Is that what's being expressed by the author? Well, we're going to talk about that some other time. But for now, give thanks to the greatest of gods because forever is his covenant faithfulness. Or you could translate his goodness. Again, it all depends on context. All right, now let's jump down to the Targum here. And when I read this, I'm going to read this without the yud here in accordance with Mikrot Gedolot HaKeter, which is an updated scientific edition of the Targums, among other things. And I'll bring that up a little bit later. But we're going to read that as if it does not have the yud there. So we get Shabachu le'la lahya arum le'olam tuvei. Shabachu, which means praise again, give praise. It's in the Pael, or D stem. Le'ala lahya. So this is a literal translation of the Hebrew, which means to the God of gods. Le'ala, Allah is very similar to the Arabic word Allah for God, and also the Hebrew word Eloah. Le'ala elahaya. Elahaya is the masculine plural determined form of Elah. And so that means gods. So shabahu la lahia arum, because alam, forever, if we're going to go with that translation, tuve, his goodness, just like the previous verse. All right. We've got to look over at the Dead Sea Scrolls here. And so in 11Q5, we have the same consonantal text as in BHS, in Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. So, and you can see that just by comparing them. The only difference here is that there is a vav for the O vowel in 11Q5, whereas here the vav is lacking. We would say that this is a Malay form, and this is a chaser form, a lacking. Malay means full spelling, so with vowel letters, and this is chaser. There is no vav serving as an O vowel. The same thing actually happens here in Ha Elohim. There's a vav for Elohim, whereas you don't get that over here. Ki leolam. Now here in BHS, olam is plane, or Malay, I should say, to use the Hebrew. It's the full spelling with the vav, so we have that over here in 11Q5, and chasto is exactly the same. So we do see a difference, though, in that the consonantal text is slightly different from the between the Dead Sea Scrolls in 11Q5 and BHS. All right, so now let's go quickly look at the Greek. And here we get exomologeste, which means confess to, and this is a plural imperative. Confess to God, confess to the God of gods, literally the God of the gods, but the Greek article is not translated always into English. Again, for another time. So confess to the God of gods, confess to the greatest of gods, that forever is, the is implied, the mercy of him, or, the goodness of him. So confess to the God of gods that his goodness is forever, that his mercy is forever, I should say. All right, well, those are the first two verses of Psalm 136 in Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. And if you're interested in this sort of thing and would like to improve your Greek and or your Hebrew and or your Aramaic, I do teach lessons now through Sabra Global Education. And so I invite you to check out my teacher page, the link for which is in the description below. See you next time, everybody.